And so we have to be a little bit careful. We have to look at the failure state and see what it's about. In the case of singing, for example, it's all about whether you get paid. Well, therefore, if you are singing in a circumstance where payment is not the issue, it will not conceivably happen. And if it did happen, it would be coming kind of out of left field. At that point, you say, all right, it's not about the role. You can sing. You have the skill. Sing. And it doesn't have anything to do. The person's reaction to how well you're singing isn't going on. This is very dicey territory because although conceptually it makes a lot of sense, and you find it in a lot of games, stated along the lines of only roll when there's something at stake, only roll in, dangerous conditions or if there are crisis conditions. But that never stops people from thinking of your percent with the roll as being literally how often you succeed at it in all the instances statistically. I mean, it's presented as a percent, right? I mean, even if it's a different dice system, it's still a percentage, and people interpret that as meaning, well, all the times I'm going to do this in my life, unless my percentage changes, that's the percent that I'm going to succeed throughout my life. And so these situations in the game when we roll are a little fictional experienced subset of that larger picture of the fact that I'm, 75% with a sword. And so I'm saying abandon that. And it's really hard to abandon it, even in games that say, throw that out, and if you aren't in a crisis situation, you're going to be fine. You see, that kind of puts you in the situation of the old cursed sword from D&D, right? I mean, you get this magic sword, and you're like, rock, you detect magic. Okay, it's magic. I got a magic sword. And then you're like, well, shoot, what if it's a cursed sword? And then so you start testing it, right? You test it and see how good you are with it. And you spar with your buddy, or you take a few chops at a tree trunk or something. And of course, there it is in the cursed sword description that it will act like a proper magic sword. And so you get your +1 while sparring with your buddy, and it chops right through the tree trunk and all that stuff. And you're like, rock, I've got the right sword. Aha, but not when you're fighting like a monster foe, for lack of a better word, for real. Nope, -2. Haha, it was cursed. And you're like, well, wait, how does it know? Right? I mean, is the magic, the rule is simply there to keep the players strategizing at bay. It's not there because it's, more fun magic or whatever. I mean, that's either good or bad. But what I'm saying is that that's how we're sort of treating these skills all of a sudden. They work until such a time as, aha, now you're in hell. Now you've got your 25% chance to fail. Why? Because. Well, sometimes that because can be a good thing. You could treat it kind of fictionally speaking, and that can be a guide. But I think it's more conceptual in the sense that we're watching the characters in circumstances of productive failure. We're watching the character in circumstance. You're an expert with a sword, but today is the day, when you have a tough time. Is that what we're doing here? Is that what a skill system is for? Should you shift like that in and out, or is it supposed to be descriptive of what your character's like? Well, that brings up another issue, the last one, that Lorenzo very nicely described in terms of his personal experience. And he talked about being trained to use a forklift, very manly act of driving a putt-putt, which lifts heavy objects and transporting them about, sliding them into the right, spot in the container and stuff like that. And clearly, operating a forklift is something that you should not do without knowing how. Both for yourself and for others. Dreadful things may well occur. Maybe not quite as dreadful or as consistently dreadful as a chainsaw, wood chipper, or, backhoe or something, but pretty bad. So his point was that he received a small amount of training and didn't use it very much, and was hardly, a hardened veteran of years of experience with the forklift. But regardless, throughout his entire time in the job doing, with that, which included that, he operated it fine. There was no dreadful there was no dreadful forklift accident. Does that mean he has 100% in his operate forklift skill? No, how could he? He received minimal training. It wasn't a daily or a constant part of his job. He did not, if you will, level up as a forklift operator, nor did his skill through a series of successes get better and better. I mean, there's no way to say it. Very unlikely that he went from like a 10% to an 80% with forklift, all the way through, happening to roll successfully all the way through. That doesn't work. Doesn't make any sense. And even if you have an 80%, who the hell is going to let somebody operate a forklift if they have every single time they use it 20% chance of fucking it up? 20% on the job? Are you kidding? So you see, there's something very not right about roll for first aid, roll to sing, roll to do this, roll to do that. The very fundamental notion of a skill system that goes all the way back to BRP, basically, in the late 70s. It can work in making the fiction, but not if it's thought of as operating the forklift in the human way that a person is expected to do. You've received your training. If you stay safe, and do your job, the chances of you having a dreadful accident or even just screwing it up are extremely small. I mean, extremely small. In role-playing terms, master, adept, grandmaster level chances of failure. So for Undiscovered, I think my solution is pretty clear. I will explicitly say, you've been bitten by the hyena in this fashion. Your arm has got to be broken and you're going to have to do first aid to recover, and so it's either going to go down or up. You're in a failed state of first aid already. And whether I have a really good criterion for that, for damage, well, I'm not sure. For other skills, I think it'll be a lot easier. You can say, okay, what's the failure state? And then you say, well, the failure state involves like getting paid for a solid performance with an instrument or singing or something. And this whole circumstance has nothing to do with getting paid whatsoever. So the skill is off the table. Just saying perform will consider you to have done a passable job. They've got the grades of skills and then, novice up through, adept, novice, initiate. They've got this little gradation. We'll say, well, how good would, these four categories be? Sort of the second rank in sing. Well, okay, you can sing pretty passably. It's not going to, get you any amazing, word of your performance will not travel far and wide, but everyone there is going to have a reasonably good time listening to you. And that's how I'm going to do it, using the ranks as the description without a roll, unless I look at the fiction, look at the failure state listed in the skill, and say, all right, is that actually possibly going to happen? So all sorts of things this is going to apply to, quite interesting. If, for example, the characters have been camping out in the areas where Vefselk usually hunts and, spends a great deal of her time. She self-described kind of huntress, outsider, doesn't like to hang around, the other members of the tribe. Well, that's fine. There's no role for that. But here they are traversing across the landscape that none of them know. They're striking out quite luckily in the right direction, as it turns out. And they don't really know what the terrain is in the next quarter mile, as they go along. They have to scout. They have to, move a little slowly, and they got to stop early each day because they need to look for a good camping spot. And she made her camping roll. I had Sam make the camping roll, and Bev Selk succeeded, and so therefore we say, that came into the story as well. Because in those circumstances, the failure state of camping, which is listed, let's see if I can look it up reasonably quickly. We're all getting pretty good at whipping to the right page. The skills are all in these little sets, and so if I can find the outdoor ones reasonably quickly, then I can tell you what the failure state for camping is. Oh, bummer. I think I missed it. Oh, well. Here we go. Well, here it says camp building. That's the skill. And it tells us there. Failing your roll means you are unable to start a fire, or you may have picked an inhabited cave. If you are on the run, you may have picked a spot that is in plain sight of those chasing you. All right. So what we need is a situation in order to roll at all for camp building from now on, is that you're you're being pursued. That's one possibility. Another is that it's kind of important for you to start a fire. And it's kind of important for you to find, a safe enclosure or something like that. And in the circumstance that they were in, I think we can even broaden it a little bit to say you're in unfamiliar territory and you're going to need something like a cave or some spot to give you a good vantage point, and not a 360 to worry about. Because of the critters that are out there. And of course I had my hyenas, ready to go. So the idea here is that I can look at the situation and say, aha, that failure state does apply. That would be important for you. So it's a roll. Okay. That's my thoughts. And I hope you're enjoying it, because we are rather enjoying what's going on with that. Plenty to talk about in terms of the otherness, the whole half-breed and racism issue that I'm playing without, in my opinion, trying too hard. And what's emerging, I think, is worthy of its own reflection. All right. Thank you again.